Well, good morning and welcome to the City Planning Commission's public meeting. Before our secretary begins, I'd like to note that by some measures, 18 years is a very long time. Children who weren't born on the infamous September 11th are now in the workforce. They're serving in our military, and some of them will be eligible to vote for the first time this November. But by other measures, 18 years is the flash of an eye. And so I think it's important, particularly as the names are being read, for us to take a moment of reflection and remembrance. Thank you.
Good morning. This is the City Planning Commission public meeting held at NYC City Planning Commission hearing room, Lower Concourse, 120 Broadway. Today is Wednesday, September 11, 2019. As a courtesy during the proceedings, we ask that you please turn off all cell phones and electronic devices. All speakers should fill out a speaker's card. In addition, we ask that those providing testimony please identify yourself, limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and speak clearly into the microphone. I will now call the roll. Chair Lago. Here. Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Here.
Commissioner Burney.
Here.
Commissioner Capelli.
Here.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Here.
Commissioner Delauss.
Here.
Commissioner Dweck.
Here.
Commissioner Edie. Commissioner Knight.
Here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
Commissioner Rampachet.
Here.
A quorum is present. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, August 28, 2019, and special meeting of Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019.
On the minutes, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes are approved.
The next part of the calendar is the report section on page 1. Borough of the Bronx, calendar number 1, CD9 C190426 PCX. In the matter of an application for the site selection and acquisition of property concerning 1155-1157 Commerce Avenue. For a favorable report on calendar number 1, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chair Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Burney.
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin. Yes. Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz. Yes. Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 1. Borough of Manhattan, calendar numbers 2 and 3. Calendar number 2, CD11, C190158, ZMM. Calendar number 3, N190156, ZRM. In the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning Terrence Cardinal Cook. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 2 and 3. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Burney.
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz. Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 2 and 3. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 4, CD2, C190317, CZSM. In the matter of an application for the grant of a special permit concerning 363 Lafayette Street. For a favorable report on calendar number 4. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Burney.
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz. Yes. Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 4. Borough of Queens, calendar numbers 5, 6, and 7. Calendar number 5, CD1, C100421, ZMQ. Calendar number 6, N190151, ZRQ. Calendar number 7, C190386, CSQ. In the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments and for the grant of a special permit concerning Vernon Boulevard, Broadway rezoning. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 5, 6, and 7. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Barney.
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delauss.
Yes, although
Commissioner, oh, sorry.
the city council modifies it to limit just to MIH option 1.
Dweck?
Yes.
Commissioner Edie? Yes. Commissioner Knight? Yes. Commissioner Levin?
Yes.
Commissioner Marin?
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz? Commissioner Rampachet? Okay. Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 5, 6, and 7. Borough of Queens, calendar numbers 8 and 9. Calendar number 8, CD1, C180036, ZMQ. Calendar number 9, N180037, ZRQ. In the matter of application for zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning 38th Street 35th Avenue rezoning. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 8 and 9, Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles,
Yes.
Commissioner Burney,
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Delos,
Yes, and similar to the prior vote, I hope that the council limits it to MIH option 1.
okay. Commissioner Dweck,
Yes.
Commissioner Edie,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
Yes.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz, Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
Okay. Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 8 and 9. Borough of Queens, calendar number 10, CD10, C190458, ZSQ, in the matter of an application for the grant of a special permit concerning 130-24 South Conduit Avenue self-storage. For a favorable report on calendar number 10, Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles,
Yes.
Commissioner Burney,
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Delos,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck,
Yes.
Commissioner Edie,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
Yes.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz, Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 10. Borough of Queens, calendar number 11, CD14, C180282, ZMQ, in the matter of an application for a zoning map amendment concerning 91-05 Beach Channel Drive. For a favorable report on calendar number 11, Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles,
Yes.
Commissioner Burney,
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Delos,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck, Commissioner Edie,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight, Commissioner Levin,
Yes.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz,
Yes.
Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 11. Borough of Queens, calendar number 12, CD6, C190422, ZMQ, in the matter of an application for a zoning map amendment concerning 112-06 71st Road rezoning. For a favorable report on calendar number 12, Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles,
Yes.
Commissioner Burney,
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Delos,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck,
Yes.
Commissioner Edie,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
I'm uncomfortable using our processes to legalize work that was done without any effort to get DOB permits. I'm going to vote no on this one.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz, Commissioner Rampachet. A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 12. Borough of Queens, calendar number 13, CD7, C180291, ZMQ, in the matter of an application for a zoning map amendment concerning 15-33 Clintonville Street rezoning. For a favorable report on calendar number 13, Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles,
Yes.
Commissioner Burney,
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Delos,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck,
Yes.
Commissioner Edie,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight, Commissioner Levin,
Yes.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz,
Yes.
Commissioner Rampachet. A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 13. Borough of Queens, calendar numbers 14 and 15, calendar number 14, CD4, C190439, ZSQ, calendar number 15, N190440, ZRQ, in the matter of application for a grant of special permit and a zoning text amendment concerning Left Rack City Parking Garage. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 14 and 15, Chair Lago,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles,
Yes.
Commissioner Burney,
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli,
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo,
Yes.
Commissioner Delos,
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck,
Yes.
Commissioner Edie,
Yes.
Commissioner Knight,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
Yes.
Commissioner Marin,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz, Commissioner Rampachet. Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 14 and 15. Borough of Queens, calendar number 16, CD1, C190424, PCQ, in the matter of an application for site selection and acquisition of property concerning FDNY EMS Station 49. For a favorable report on calendar number 16, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Burney.
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delos.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 16. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 17, CD2, C190431, PCR, in the matter of an application for the site selection and acquisition of property concerning Wetlock Avenue, Blue Belt. For a favorable report on calendar number 17, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Vice Chairman Knuckles.
Yes.
Commissioner Burney.
Yes.
Commissioner Capelli.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delos.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Commissioner Rampachet.
Yes.
A favorable report has been adopted on calendar number 17. The next part of the calendar is the public hearing section on page 20. Citywide calendar numbers 18 through 25. Calendar number 18, CDs 13 and 15, C190394, PQK. Calendar number 19, CDs 13 and 15, C190395, PPK. Calendar number 20, CDs 10 and 14, C190396, PCQ. Calendar number 21, CDs 10 and 14, C190397, PQQ. Calendar number 22, CDs 10 and 14, C190398, PPQ. Calendar number 23, CDs 2 and 3, C190399, PCR. Calendar number 24, CDs 2 and 3, C190400, PQR. Calendar number 25, CDs 2 and 3, C190401, PPR. A public hearing in the matter of applications for site selection and acquisition of city-owned properties concerning resilient housing and open space.
Given the breadth and geographic scope of this application, we'll have a 15-minute team presentation by Amy Peterson, Deborah Morris, Colin Alderson, Claude Ruiz, and available for questioning, Chris Grove.
Hi, good morning. My name's Amy Peterson. I'm the director of the Build It Back program in the Mayor's Office of Housing and Recovery Operations, HRO. Thank you, commissioners and members of the public, for this opportunity to introduce the Resilient Housing and Open Space Project, which consists of 3 ULURP applications in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island. Build It Back is a voluntary program that was created to assist homeowners, landlords, and tenants affected by Hurricane Sandy. The city received $2.2 billion from HUD to support housing recovery efforts, and this work is overseen by my office, HRO, in partnership with HPD and the Department of Design and Construction. Benefits in the program were determined primarily based on level of damage. Homes that were not substantially damaged, meaning the cost to repair was less than half the value of the home, had the option of repair or reimbursement. Homes that were substantially damaged had the option of a construction benefit to have their homes rebuilt or elevated, or to sell their property. Together with the Governor's Office of Storm Recovery, we referred over 400 property owners to the state to with an interest in selling their property. The state had its own acquisition program, and then the city established an acquisition and buyout program. So the city purchased some properties on our own. The state also had a large buyout program on Staten Island for some properties. Today, we're going to be discussing the properties that the city purchased. HRO managed the eligibility for the acquisition program, and HPD managed the acquisition process and planning for the future uses of the properties in coordination with city planning, environmental protection, parks, and DCAS. HUD's funding provides two different property acquisition tools with very different goals. Acquisition for redevelopment, which uses the property for redevelopment of flood-resilient 1 to 4 family residences, or buyout, which means converting the properties to open space in perpetuity. HPD assigns sites to either resilient housing uses or open space, according to definitions and objectives laid out by HUD and in coordination with city planning. As such, the lead applicant is HPD. The co-applicants on this application are DCAS in all 3 boroughs, Parks in Queens and Staten Island, and DEP in Staten Island. Through these actions, storm-damaged properties are converted to a more appropriate end use that will make New York City's vulnerable neighborhoods more resilient to future flooding. Deborah Morris will provide an overview of the proposed actions, and representative from Parks and DEP will describe specific projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Deborah Morris, and I am the Executive Director of Resiliency Planning, Policy, and Acquisitions at the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. The proposed actions are listed here. Because it is not possible for the city to directly acquire properties from storm victims without going through a lengthy discretionary process, the city procured a subrecipient, a nonprofit called Project Rebuild, Inc., to directly acquire, manage, demolish, and dispose of property in compliance with CDBG-DR regulations. The proposed actions include all of these properties and will allow the city to directly bring certain properties into public ownership to facilitate open space and housing goals, and for the remainder, allow the city the right to retain the authority to acquire properties if a private owner does not maintain the property in compliance with the program. As these properties were already purchased by Project Rebuild through federal funding, the city will not pay or spend new dollars on the purchase of these properties. As Amy mentioned, there are 2 types of sites, open space lots and resilient housing. HUD has strict requirements for the use of these sites. For open space lots, the open space use is required in perpetuity. No new structures other than public restrooms or a flood control structure are permitted. Compliance will be enforced through deed restrictions and through management and enforcement by public agencies. In the ULURP, the open space lots intended for city ownership will be managed by Parks and DEP and are proposed for site selection and acquisition. The open space lots intended for city ownership by DCAS are proposed for acquisition and disposition so that the city has the flexibility to assign lots to a qualified steward. There are also open space lots intended for private ownership, which will be sold by PRI to next door neighbors to purchase and maintain as an open side yard. These sites are proposed for acquisition and disposition in the so that the city can acquire the lots if the future owner does not comply with the terms of the deed restriction maintenance as open space. Resilient housing lots are required to be redeveloped as flood-compliant residences and are required to maintain flood insurance in perpetuity. CDBG-DR requires expeditious redevelopment in order to allow community recovery and restoration of community services. To facilitate resilient redevelopment, HPD has developed 2 pathways, managed redevelopment and a private auction. All properties will have the deed restrictions requiring an aggressive redevelopment schedule, flood insurance mandates, and enforcement of homeowner association regulations where applicable. Enforcement of the deed restrictions and auction sites may require recapturing the property. Managed redevelopment will be managed by HPD through developers selected through an RFP. All housing lots are proposed for acquisition and disposition. Disposition is restricted to 1 or 2 family residential use with street frontage or an open space use unless developed as an assemblage in conjunction with adjacent lots pursuant to zoning and with street frontage. Oh, sorry, that was the comparison there. No, that's better. Managed redevelopment is for properties that support the development of affordable and flood-resilient homes. The decision for managed redevelopment was based on analyzing location, zoning, economic feasibility, neighborhood characteristics, and other development factors. The private auction pathway is for sites that, for a variety of reasons, are difficult to develop, and for that reason would be overly burdensome on affordable housing developers or future homeowners. Private auction sites will be sold to the highest bidder at a publicly advertised auction. The purpose of the proposed actions is to ensure that the properties acquired through Sandy recovery efforts provide a public benefit and allow the city to comply with CDBG-DR grant requirements. As previously mentioned, there are 3 simultaneous actions in Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. And this is a chart listing the summary of site pathways broken down by borough. There are 13 sites in Brooklyn, all for acquisition and disposition, 74 sites in Queens, and 54 in Staten Island. Because of the breadth of geography of these sites, we can go through them on a site-by-site basis by questions. The ULURP certified, here's Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. The ULURP certified in May with the goal of completion by the end of this year. In the interim, Project Rebuild may dispose of open space sites intended for private ownership, and housing sites may be sold through a private auction. However, for the rest of the sites, this discretionary action needs to be complete before the city can acquire open space sites or sites intended for affordable homeownership. I'm turning over to DEP and DPR to review their proposed facilities. Please let us know if you have any questions about any specific property. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Colleen Alderson. I am the Chief of Parklands and Real Estate for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. As said previously, the Parks Department is a co-applicant on the ULURPs pertaining to Queens and Staten Island. There's a total of 25 lots that are intended to be added to the Parks Department portfolio. 21 are in Queens and 4 on Staten Island. 16 lots in Queens are intended to be a new marsh restoration area in the Ramblersville neighborhood. The other lots in Queens are going to be added to existing park resources, Brandt Park and Bayswater. For Staten Island, the lots are going to be added to existing parks there as well, Crescent Beach, Blue Heron, Conference House Park, and Crescent Beach Park. I'm here to answer any questions that you might have about the open space lots that are intended to come into Parks portfolio.
Is that the end of the team presentation?
No, we have DEP.
Okay.
Sorry.
There's a minute left, so.
Good morning, Chair Lago and Commissioners. My name is Flor Ruiz. I'm representing DEP. We are acquiring 5 lots that will be incorporated into our Bluebird program and will remain as an open space. And again, we'll be happy to answer any questions if you have.
Before I turn it over for questioning from the commission, could you go back to the slide that shows the totals by borough?
The table. This one? This one?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to assure the commissioners that while we're discussing these now in the aggregate, that the department worked with HPD, Parks, and DEP over the course of a number of years on going through on a site-by-site basis. And your materials are so thick because we have included information about each of the sites. And with that, I'll open it to questions. Commissioner Burney.
Good. Thank you for the presentation. If you'd been here on Monday at the review session, you would have heard us talking about the question of the 23 sites that are going to be repurposed as housing. And we were just thinking about, these obviously are houses that have been inundated by past storms. And in the near future, they'll probably be inundated by more storms. And in the long-term future, they'll probably be underwater. So we were questioning the policy of actually repurposing these as housing. And there was an interesting article in the Times today about the way the Canadians are handling this issue, doing more buyouts. They have somewhat easier constitutional path, of course, but I'm interested, and I don't know, you may not be able to answer this question, but I'm interested in what is our long-term policy about waterfront residents, particularly in places that are clearly in the future going to be uninhabitable. And are we in a position where we will be reinvesting taxpayer money again and again after every storm to repurpose sites for housing?
Thank you for that question. We've worked very closely with the Department of City Planning on making the choices and determining the paths for these properties. An owner selling their property to the Build It Back program, their property was purchased regardless of what it could be used for. In evaluating the sites on whether they could be reused for housing or whether they're best used for open space, we looked closely with the Department of City Planning at the resilient neighborhood planning initiatives, other hazard mitigation or hazard plans, wetland, coastal erosion areas, as well as the existing built fabric of the many neighborhoods here, which are very different from each other. We did not take the choice of creating a site open space in perpetuity lightly. We thought that's a very significant change, particularly when you're talking about small properties in between other houses that are in very strong condition. And although we do have sites planned for affordable homeownership, we also have sites going into auction where redevelopment does not require the construction of a new structure. It only requires management of the site consistent with a community plan. So an improvement could be a fence. So we do imagine some sites purchased as acquisition for redevelopment will actually not be redeveloped as structures. They will be redeveloped as open space and side yards.
Could you show the Queen's map for a second? Just,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oop.
Oh, lost it.
Sorry.
No, keep going. Yeah, just because I know this neighborhood a bit better. So it's hard to tell, you can't tell from this map which are the ones that are going to be acquired as open space and which are going to be auctioned as housing.
Sure, but I can go through them for you if you'd like.
Well,
so the sites in Broad Channel, Ramblersville, Hamilton Beach, and Old Howard Beach are almost exclusively open space sites. That's an extremely flood vulnerable area, and many of those sites are going into parks ownership. The ones in Broad Channel are going into this private side yard program. But the physical conditions on the Rockaway Peninsula itself are quite a bit more eclectic. Let me just pull up a few as an example.
Oh, you've got lots more pictures.
Oh, we have so many pictures, so I'm happy to. So here as an example where we are using.
All 141.
Yeah, I'm happy to. We've thought deeply about this, and we want you to understand the thinking and the logic. So I think starting in Queens. So in Ramblersville, which is a flood-prone area. Many of the houses are on boardwalks. These are all open space sites with the exception, I believe, of one semi-attached house. Oh no, that's in Old Howard Beach, hold on. Yeah, the purple house there is half of a semi-attached house where it's too hard to figure out how to remove half a structure. And there the intention is for a gradual shift towards an open space use. There are still other residences in place. Hamilton Beach, given the flood vulnerability, even though there is quite a built fabric, we did employ buyouts. This is Broad Channel. This gives you more of a sense of Broad Channel and the flood vulnerability there. So Neponset is where it starts to get a little bit stickier. And this is a small site surrounded by other homes in very strong condition. It is our feeling that although the risks facing the Rockaway are strong, there's also opportunity for redevelopment, and redevelopment can take many different forms. And this is Rockaway Park. Also surrounded by other.
When redevelopment could take many different forms, but it is 1 and 2 family homes.
It is 1 and 2 family homes that is, so this action is pursuant to zoning. Any other form of redevelopment would have to come to this body. But I think as a planning entity thinking in the 50 or 100-year framework, a buyout is a buyout. It's open space in perpetuity, whereas acquisition for redevelopment allows any number of considerations of use of that land in the future. So right now we are speaking about 1 to 2 family homes, but if this neighborhood were to look totally different 20 or 50 years ago, you would have flexibility about what could be on that property, whereas a buyout, you could only have open space. This is Rockaway Beach. This is Arborn, where we have sites coming into buyout as well as acquisition for redevelopment based on the presence of wetlands. This is Edgemere, where we also have sites that are being transitioned into open space, as well as joining HPD's portfolio in the Edgemere Urban Renewal area for management that will be consistent with the rest of that neighborhood plan, and will come before this body at a future time. And Far Rockaway. So that is Queens.
Okay, good, thank you. That's helpful.
Pelly.
I'm more familiar with the properties in Staten Island, having spent an extensive amount of time in that area, well, in that area in general, but in that area post-Sandy. And I'm wondering why there is so little space being put to creating additional buffers. It just seems to me that a more prudent way to go would be to protect the other homes there by developing less in an area that is in all likelihood going to be flooded out again. And that in order to protect the existing property and not be throwing good money after bad, that a greater consideration should be made to creating more open space and more marshland or protected areas, and not using that as a place to build housing. So can you say with any certainty that these, by developing these sites, that it's not going to endanger or put the other homes there at a greater risk of damage by a storm of comparable size?
If I understand your question, is the question that does the development of new housing negatively affect existing housing? Is that correct?
In the face of a future storm.
So our belief is that new resiliently redeveloped houses that are developed pursuant to Building Code Appendix G, elevated above base flood elevation.
Excuse me, you're not answering.
No, I'm going to get to the answer to your question. I want to speak to the effort that can be put into the built form of a new house to make that house resilient and resistant to storm damage and its occupants.
But the question was about
other houses. So an elevated house has elevated space underneath it. So if we're looking at, we can use Sunnymead Village here, or I want something a little more scattershot here. What you have is actually a lot more permeable surface underneath the structure where water can flow. So one of the great changes we hope to see just in Sandy recovery overall is through the elevation structures, as you actually have quite a bit better stormwater management in an event rather than using structures themselves
Where
as
is
a
that
defense.
water going to flow to?
Well, if you're speaking in a hurricane context, the water would flow in and flow out. And in an elevated structure, it would flow under the structure.
Were you down at those grounds after Sandy?
I was not in Staten Island. I did visit Brooklyn and Queens.
Okay. I mean,
but I would add
a absolutely abhorrent situation. And, you know, the idea of building more homes there instead of protecting what you've invested in already, to me, just does not make a lot of sense.
So many of the areas in Staten Island in particular are being protected by a large Army Corps project called the Staten Island Line of Protection, which when completed, the building code provisions that will affect these houses requiring elevation of those structures will no longer be necessary because those properties will no longer be considered in the floodplain. So Staten Island, unlike some of the communities in the Rockaways, has the benefit of this additional investment in storm protection facilities, and for that reason, we think is a reasonable place to redevelop housing.
The other thing I realize is that it may be helpful both for longer-term commissioners and ones who joined after we did our resilient rezoning initiatives in Old Howard Beach and in portions of Staten Island. That was a department initiative to very comprehensively look at where new buildings should be allowed in especially flood-prone areas. At the review session, we will come back with information about that. And it's interesting that the commissioners are focusing in on Queens and Staten Island because that is principally where we did the work because of what high priority neighborhoods they were, or what high flood risk neighborhoods they were. Yes, Commissioner Marin.
Deborah, thank you for that presentation. When you responded to Commissioner Capelli, you talked about the wall that's being built and the flood mitigation measures that are being put in place. Does that mean that the flood maps in that neighborhood will change eventually to show where the flood lines will not be extending to?
So, you know, the flood map adoption process with FEMA is a long process, but that is one of the things that has taken place in other municipalities after barriers types similar to these have been put into place.
I also want to put out there that I worked on the Sandy program with a developer, and it was very expensive to build these homes. And one of the criticisms was the fact that we were using public subsidy to build these small bungalows that cost upwards of $1 million. So I just want to put it out there that these are going to be costly homes no matter what. You're dealing with silty sand conditions out in Staten Island that require helical piles. These are very expensive designs that need to be implemented to make sure these homes don't go anywhere.
I just wanted to note on the issue of the FEMA flood maps and the length of time that it takes. The Commission's post-Sandy rezoning had an expiry date linked to FEMA's production of the maps, and we realized that that date is not on the horizon, and that is why we, as a department, will be coming forward to the Commission with our resiliency zoning, realizing we don't have the luxury of waiting for the new FEMA maps.
Thank you.
Commissioner De La Luz.
Deborah, you seem to be on the hot seat. This is kind of following up on Commissioner Munning's point about the cost of the properties to be redeveloped. And I'm wondering, you know, given that the RFP that was released and the anticipated term sheet to be used is for 80 to 130% of AMI, given that whether HPD, I mean, it just seems to me that it's going to end up probably being more appropriate for folks that are at 100% of AMI or above, given some of the limitations. And I just wonder if, you know, I think it's a legitimate question to ask whether or not that's, you know, how big of a need there is for home ownership at that level, you know, considering what costs of flood insurance might be over time and things like that. So how can you talk a little bit about how HPD has thought about that? And that would be one question. The other question I have, I think you said that for the sites that are going to be for resilient uses or open space, that some of them, I think it was the DCAS sites, would be assigned to qualified stewards. Could you also talk about that process?
Absolutely. I'm going to start with the affordable housing question, and then if I don't come back to it, please remind me. So the first, I want to respond to Commissioner Marin's point about the expensive structures, and I worked closely as a part of the Build It Back program with Commissioner Marin, and we're very well aware of some of the costs in Build It Back and also some of the drivers of those costs, which are not likely to exist in a different payment structure. So we feel comfortable in our ability to build these houses through a managed redevelopment process. In looking at the issue of affordability and also access to affordable housing, which the agency takes very seriously, I think taking the 1,000-foot view, the properties, particularly in Staten Island, present an opportunity for HPD to reach communities where we don't normally have the opportunity to create affordable housing options. And affordable housing home ownership is a very desired product. We think, and we have worked with our underwriting team to anticipate the costs of flood insurance, and the cost of flood insurance in flood-prone communities as it relates to home ownership is something the agency already works with on homeowners taking advantage of the Home First Mortgage Assistance Program. And so that cost and projecting out that cost is a part of understanding what the cost will be to a homeowner and not putting them in a place that would be financially challenging. For that reason, there are properties where there, particularly in Brooklyn, there was a lot of interest in seeing an affordable housing, but we thought it would not be appropriate or possible to work as affordable housing given the high costs of homeowner association fees in addition to flood insurance. In terms of the occupants and the AMI bands we're trying to reach with 80 to 120, we think we can work within the entirety of that band. You know, at any point, it really does depend on the qualified buyer's interested in that property. And we have also worked with HUD, which in relation to the CDBG-DR grant overall, which has an LMI obligation of 50%, that LMI population is actually 60 and below, and we don't think that's appropriate for home ownership, and certainly not when there is a significant flood insurance cost.
And the second question was related to the qualified storage. And you asked to be reminded.
Yes, so I appreciate that. So we have piloted in Broad Channel a yard expansion program where Project Rebuild disposes directly to neighbors, properties to be managed as open space. There have been challenges with that. We're sort of watching how that goes. In other communities, particularly in places where there may not be multiple adjacent homeowners who could be qualified to manage it, the city is interested in any number of stewardship options, either working with the city itself, leasing to a neighbor, so that if that neighbor does not maintain the property, then you can revoke the lease, which is much more simple than complying with a yard expansion program where you would have to take the property back.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Ramprashad.
I have two questions with regards to that, the lot expansion. So if I have one house and I want to buy a portion of the lot next door, you consider that to be part of the side yard, correct? This is like a side yard expansion. Would you then require me as a homeowner to file an alteration to change the meets and bounds of my property?
Hold on, I just want to bring up the yard expansion map so I can make sure we're talking about the same thing. Okay, so the yard expansion program in Broad Channel is limited to buyout properties, and the space must be open space in perpetuity. The way we have written the deed restriction is it does not allow lot mergers. It revokes all transfer of development rights, and it's pretty strict. So an owner would own their property with a house, and then they would own this other property, and they could not merge the two, and they would pay taxes on the open space lot. So in the, does that answer your question, or?
I'm just curious, because if the lot next door is, say, 20 by 100, and you sell half of it out, is that something you're saying as well, like they would sell a portion of that lot out?
Okay, so sure. So for the private open space lots, the yard expansion lots, the program is not subdividing. If there are, for instance, two neighbors on opposite sides who are both interested in the property and want to privately work out subdividing that property into two parcels, they can absolutely do that, but neither of those parcels could be merged with their adjoining properties.
Okay, the next question I have is, you said restrictions. Can I put like a tool shed if I want?
No, the tool shed would be a structure.
Any structure?
Any structure.
Fence is okay, though?
Fences are okay so long as they comply with the Department of Environmental Conservation's rules in wetlands, which the majority of yard expansion sites are in wetlands, so that is quite a process.
Right.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Burney.
Just to follow up on that, if these sites are not sold, let's say nobody wants to buy them, do they stay with the Parks Department, or what happens?
So if in the example of Broad Channel, if they are not sold, the idea is they would come into public inventory for management.
Other questions? Then I'll thank the applicant team for summarizing an awful lot of site-by-site material. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bruce Jacobs.
Hello, Commissioners. Bruce Jacobs, first responder, U.S. Navy veteran, fighter for Rockaways, fighter for Southeast Queens and all New York. I have first of all, I was part of that expansion program at Community Board 14 for Broad Channel, because they are part of my district. And I agreed, yeah, let them have the part of the land. But then, to go on Beach 43rd, Edgemere, which is my neighborhood, and they have 5, 6 houses that all of a sudden, they're gonna be developed. Anybody could buy them and get them. They're going to turn into a big giant building. I don't care what they say, because they even said themselves at this meeting that after the fact, whoever private ownership buys it, they could do what they want with it afterwards. Later on in the future, there's no guarantees of it. On Beach 43rd, Beach 45th Street, there's no reason why that land isn't being put out for the regular people or their land. Why in Broad Channel? Because Broad Channel is a so-called richer neighborhood. My neighborhood, Far Rockaway, the neighbors deserve open land. You're gonna put a house, like Commissioner David Burney said, where's the water going? The other guy's not lifted. He don't have money to lift his house. Now what's gonna happen? Water is gonna go in that guy's house and he's gonna get flooded. It's not gonna prevent nothing. The idea of an open space, that's a good idea, but that was part of Community 14. We decided on it, but we did ask them, what are they doing with these properties? They said there was a guarantee that these are going to two-family homes, affordable. Now, in this presentation that I hear in this room, it sounds like that went out the window. You know, I'm not dressed in a suit. I could go buy a suit and dress in a suit. You know, I did pretty good in my life. But I'm gonna say, I don't have no fancy lawyers standing with me saying, hey, where's these other houses? Where's the people that are next door? Where's the representative for these people? And, you know, I feel like, in a way, nobody ever asked me a question about, I know my neighborhood very good, and I fight for my neighborhood. And I feel like these guys gave a total different thing when they went to Community Board 14. They came here in front of you. And I'll put my name out. Bruce Jacobs, Coalition of Rockaway, Medical and Religious Freedom. I'll put it out. They gave a different story when they came to our community board. And now they come here with you, and you guys are gonna end up probably voting, yeah, okay, yeah, it's development. In the meanwhile, half those houses were destroyed before Sandy, like Alan said.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you.
Those are the only speakers who have registered, but if anyone else would like to be heard, please come forward. The public hearing is closed. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make a clarification about the Staten Island levy.
I'm sorry. You could submit anything in writing afterwards.
Okay,
Thanks.
no problem.
Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 26, CD5, C190452 PCK. A public hearing in the matter of an application for site selection and acquisition of property concerning the Green Gems Garden addition.
Our first speaker will be Michael Portegi-Zwart.
Good morning, Chair Lago and Commissioners. My name is Michael Portegi-Zwart. I'm a project planner with the Department of Parks and Recreation. Parks with co-applicant Department of Citywide Administrative Services are seeking to site select and acquire property located at 151 Fountain Avenue in Community Board 5 in Brooklyn. The requested action would allow Parks and DCAS to acquire the subject property to facilitate the expansion of the Green Gems Community Garden. The site, here seen outlined in red, is a 2,500 square foot lot on the east side of Fountain Avenue, mid-block between Glenmore Avenue and Liberty Avenue. The current garden consists of 13 lots, 12 of which are city-owned and were acquired by the city between 1972 and 1986. They were subsequently assigned to Parks for garden purposes in 2002 and 2005. Collectively, these are known as the Green Gems Community Garden. Here you can more clearly see the tax lots. The project is surrounded by 1- and 2-family homes, as well as multifamily residential apartment buildings with a building height of 3 stories. The area is zoned R5B, which allows detached and semi-detached residential buildings. The garden is currently licensed through the Parks Green Thumb program. License requirements include keeping the garden open to the public at least 20 hours a week, allowing neighborhood residents to join the community garden on a first-come, first-served basis, posting information and signage on the garden's fence, as you can see in this picture here. The garden has been a positive community resource, providing community-managed passive open space for residents and a setting for environmental education. The garden grows fruit trees, vegetables. They have 24 raised planter beds. There are 15 fruit trees on the site. The garden has 24 chickens, 4 rabbits, and the garden uses these as part of their horticulture educational programs. This coming fall, they will be hosting a workshop in collaboration with Green Thumb for winter chicken care. Councilmember Espinal has acknowledged the importance of preserving the entire garden and allocated funding towards the acquisition of this private property. There are also 24 planting beds that are being used by a local high school, the Transit Tech CTE High School, K615. In conclusion, the Parks Department and DCAS are seeking the City Planning Commission's support of this proposed action to facilitate the acquisition and preservation of the privately owned lot so that it may be formally included as part of the larger community garden. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions? Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. I had this question at review session. Are these parcels, once they come under the domain of DPR, do they become mapped as parkland, or do you merely manage the properties?
They're not considered mapped parkland. They're preserved under the rules of the City of New York, Title 56, Chapter 6, which preserves them as a community garden.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bruce Jacobs.
Bruce Jacobs, Coalition of the Rockaways, Medical and Religious Freedom, U.S. Navy vet, 9/11 first responder, 30 years New York City Transit. The idea of a park sounds good, but I know one of the community parks in my neighborhood, they're 4 times the price of food when you go in there to buy it. My wife will not walk in there. You got pieces of land in Blake Avenue around this neighborhood that they do need affordable housing. You're taking land from somebody that they say is not compliant or whatever they're saying, they want to add it on. I like to see this person who owns this property. What kind of price is he getting for this property? Is he getting pushed out? And in that neighborhood, property is worth a lot of money in East New York. So to give up parks, everything is okay in Rockaway, but in Brooklyn, where they do need affordable housing, I see that there's no doubt of it. To give over an extra, a piece of land without this guy, whoever owns this private owner, I like to see who he is. They say a community for schools, they say it's going to add on. Also, are they selling food? Because if they're selling food, I know in my neighborhood, the community garden is 5 times the price of going into a supermarket. So, you know, to give out land just because they want to give out land and say that they're helping the neighborhood, that's a question that a lot of people got to ask themselves. I know, you know, you guys probably think it's like, sounds all good, yeah, in a park, but it is a piece of land and it's a valuable piece of land. Is he getting paid for this land, or is he getting, like, pushed out of this land? I would like to know those facts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any additional speakers who would like to be heard on this matter? The public hearing is closed.
Borough of Brooklyn, calendar numbers 27 through 30. Calendar number 27, C190409HAK. Calendar number 28, C190410ZMK. Calendar number 29, N190411ZRK. Calendar number 30, C190421ZSK. A public hearing in the matter of applications for UDAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property for zoning map and zoning text amendments and a special permit concerning 515 Blake Avenue.
We will have a 10-minute presentation by an applicant team. The speakers will be Erin Buchanan, Tom Hammerline, and Mark Ginsberg. In addition, for questions, we have representatives of Help USA, of Kramer Levin, of the city's Department of Homeless Services, of Curtis and Ginsberg, and of HPD.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Erin Buchanan, and I'm from the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development. With me today are members, as you heard, from the development team working on the 515 Blake Avenue project. The project at 515 Blake Avenue proposes to redevelop the existing homeless shelter on the site into 3 new affordable housing buildings, a new homeless shelter, and community facility and retail space. The URP application for this project was certified on May 20th, and HPD is the applicant. Help USA is the sponsor and will be providing further details of the proposed project. This application is before the Commission seeking approvals for Urban Development Action Area designation and project approval and the disposition of city-owned property, a zoning map amendment to rezone the development site from C43, R6, and R6C23 to R7D, C24, R6A, and R7D, C14, a zoning text amendment to designate the development site as an MIH area, and a large-scale general development special permit pursuant to zoning resolution section 74-743. The development site is a nearly full-block city-owned site in East New York between Blake Avenue, Snedeker Avenue, Sutter Avenue, and Hinsdale Street. The site is currently occupied by a 192-unit family shelter built in 1987. The project area is located at the intersection of a residential neighborhood and a manufacturing area. Significant residential uses in the surrounding area include the Genesis Homes, Genesis Neighborhood Plaza 1, and Genesis Neighborhood Plaza 2, which are run by Help USA. NYCHA developments in the area include Unity Plaza and Long Island Baptist houses. 2 blocks to the south along Livonia Avenue includes approximately 710 units of affordable housing that was recently financed by the city. Ground floor and commercial uses are concentrated mostly along Sutter Avenue and less so along Blake, and the project area is served by the L subway line and approximately 6 blocks away the 3 subway line and the B14 bus. The project before you today, just to summarize very briefly, includes the redevelopment of the shelter into a 195-unit new shelter building and additional affordable housing buildings ranging from 6 to 10 stories. That will total 326 affordable and supportive housing units, community facility, and retail space. Amenities in the building will include supportive services, bike storage, laundry rooms, community rooms, and a landscaped rear courtyard. Now Help will provide an overview of their work in the neighborhood and the further details of the proposed project.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Tom Hamline, President and CEO of Help USA. I'm also a family psychologist who spent the last 40 years working with at-risk families in urban areas, and 25 of those years have been at Help. As a psychologist, I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about our comprehensive proposal to house and serve hundreds of families in East New York, Brooklyn. The Blake Avenue site has served for the past 32 years as a location of our Help One family shelter, and a key part of our proposal is the redesign and reconstruction of this aging facility. As Aaron mentioned, there will also be additional supportive housing and affordable housing on the site, which will bring an additional 326 rental units to this neighborhood. The Blake Avenue site will contain extensive supportive service space and retail and community space. It's important to note that the early childhood classrooms, the computer training room, and after-school art spaces will also be open to residents of the larger East New York community and not restricted to the Help residential community. Help USA is a local organization committed to serving New York City families. Our first project was the Help One family shelter in East New York, which opened in 1987. Over the next 3 decades, Help has made significant capital investments into the East New York neighborhood. We have built and renovated 491 apartments, and to date have invested $147 million into East New York. What have we accomplished? We built truly affordable housing. 80% of our units in East New York are at or below 50% AMI. 20% are at or below 30% AMI. We have brought jobs to East New York. Help employs 201 full-time staff in this neighborhood. 50% of these individuals live in East Brooklyn, and our annual local payroll in the community is $10 million. We're also a service provider. We provide child and youth education, after-school services, a summer camp, street soccer program, domestic violence programs, veterans services, and host a medical clinic and dental surgery in our residential buildings. In closing, let me just summarize by saying this is a very important site for us. It has a lot of historical interest for us, and we are really looking forward to spending the next 40 years continuing to serve at-risk families and individuals in the East New York community. Thank you very much.
Mark Ginsberg, Curtis Ginsberg Architects. Just quickly go through the project. So this is the ground floor plan. You can see the 4 buildings. So on the left side, the U-shaped building is the new shelter. On the top to the right of that is the supportive housing building, and to the right of that is a affordable residential building. On the bottom is a second affordable residential building. Right now, there is one entrance on this site, and as you can see by the arrows, we're going to be drastically increasing the number of entrances, activity on the street. We are also creating 2 areas for local retail, again on the street, to activate the street and connect the buildings to the community. We're scooping out the rear yard down to the cellar level for most of the site to create amenity and activity spaces that then open directly onto the exterior space with a variety of potential activities, sitting, playground, etc. This is a view at Snedeker and Blake of the affordable building. We've worked closely with the urban designers at City Planning to work to vary the buildings within the context of a number of other factors, but and feel like we have developed the buildings in a way that makes them quite attractive and fitting much better into the neighborhood than the existing buildings. This is a view along Snedeker of our maisonette units. These will be units that open directly out to a stoop area, although it can't be raised for accessibility reasons, with plantings, and working with the scale of this to the opposite side of the street. There are a number of 2-story Nehemiah homes, and this way the scale, we're trying to connect to that scale. This is then a view on Hinsdale. On the left is the affordable building, then sort of the tan building is the supportive building, and on the right is one side of the affordable building. As you can see, again, we're trying to break down the scale and vary the facades of the different buildings. This is a view looking north of the open recreational yard. As you can see at the end, we sloped up because, as was noted, there is one building that is not part of the property, so that we have, and then you'll see on this view looking south, a hill that kids can play on, people can sit on, etc. These buildings have high sustainability objectives. So the 2 affordable buildings we're designing to passive house standards. The shelter and the supportive building will be very energy efficient buildings. And this is our schedule. As you can see, we're now in front of you in the process of having gone to the community board and the borough board, and after you, the city council. And then, Tom, do you want to speak? Or these are how we're summarizing the benefits of the project of replacing an old, outmoded shelter that was designed for 15 years that's now been running for 32 years, we've worked closely with HELP in creating a new shelter that, given their 30 years of experience, will work to minimize the trauma for families coming into the shelter system, and creating then a permanent housing on the same site. So adding the permanent housing to what's already a shelter, and improving our connections to the neighborhood and creating a building that, instead of fenced off and turning the back to the neighborhood, will open up as much as we can to the neighborhood. Thank you, and I think our whole team is now here ready to take any questions you have.
Questions from Vice Chair Knuckles.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Mark, and your team. Could someone just speak to the management of the residents of the 192 units where they will be located during the construction process, and what, if any, preference will be given to them? How will they be transitioned during this process?
Yeah, Tom Hamline again from HELP. The current shelter will be vacated over a period of 3 to 4 months. During the ramp down, we will work with DHS to stop the referral of all new families to the shelter, so we'll have an attrition period during that time. As the census gradually drops, we'll ensure that we meet or exceed all requirements for safety, maintenance staff, case management, et cetera, as some of our staff will probably be seeking to leave as they see the place closing. Our goal and DHS's goal will be to move as many families into permanent housing during this period as possible. So we have on-site housing team and we have other housing placement staff from throughout our organization that will be working with the city to make those placements. At the close of the ramp down period, some families may not have secured permanent housing. At that time, these remaining families will be redirected to other DHS shelters. We'll work with DHS Hero units to place these families in appropriate shelters that are close to schools, work, and other services, and to schedule move times that are least disruptive for these families. There may be cases where families are placed in East New York, Brooklyn, and they use this opportunity to say, well, we don't have the wherewithal right now via subsidy or earned income to make a move back into permanent housing, but we would really like to be next to our auntie in Queens. So we would then work with DHS to move that family to a shelter in Queens or in the Upper West Side or wherever they may request to go. Some families may have special needs that preclude a community placement and make transfer to another shelter difficult, and we'll identify those families and immediately begin accommodating months ahead of time to working with them for the special accommodations. We are opening another shelter that will serve in the future as additional space for DHS for these families. There are other shelters coming on at the present time in the Brooklyn area, but it's really the family's choice if they're still in shelter at that time. Where do they want to move? What sites do they prioritize? And then we work to move them there. Does that answer your question?
Yes, essentially. So, but those who want to come back to where they've lived for, better part of 30 years or some portion thereof, will there be an effort or is there a policy to accommodate them?
Let me answer that question. No families have been there for that long a period. The shelter's been open for 32 years, but it's typically a year and a half is a median length of stay. It used to be 220 days. Now it's up to around 420 because of the lack of housing options. We do not anticipate that any Help One residents will still be in the city's transitional housing system when the new shelter opens, after the review process, the demolition process, the construction process, et cetera. However, if they are, HELP will work with DHS to facilitate their return to this brand new shelter. That'll be number one. We can think of no more just approach than placing that family in a brand new, clean, and healthy environment that will optimally support their needs. And we've discussed this explicitly with DHS, and they're on board with us on this. Again, if that family would request another placement to another neighborhood that meets their family's needs, or a school transfer has happened, so there are children now in a school in central Brooklyn, and we can facilitate their movement to a shelter, we'll work with the city to make that happen.
I just had an additional question about the retail. Is this area considered a food desert?
David? David's the chief housing officer at HELP.
Have you signed up, sir?
Yes, ma'am, I have, yes. David Cleghorn with Help USA. I'm not sure if it's designated as a food desert or not. And the two commercial areas that we have on Blake and on Sutter are not currently designed with an end user in mind. They're designed to be flexible for local businesses that might want to use the space. And we're trying to keep the rents that we're underwriting in our project budgets as low as possible. So for example, on Blake Avenue, which is the shelter space, we're projecting about 1,800 square feet that we would lease that could be subdividable into smaller sections that would be leased at around $12 a square foot. On the Blake side, we have another about 2,200 square feet that's in the affordable building on the opposite side. And we would be looking at leasing those for around $5 a square foot, very, very nominal, so that we can support business growth in this location.
Thank you.
And also on the question of the food desert, staff will come back with that at the review session. Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. On the question of retail, as we look at the site plan, I noticed that, and I, appreciate the attempt, at least on Sutter, to incorporate some retail. There's a small, what seems to be, a block-long district, small node between Hinsdale and Williams. Could we look at the floor plan for the ground floor? One question I have, right now the shelter lobby is the section of the building that is most proximate to that small node, and the retail is a little bit orphaned at the moment. Is there, retail wants to be on a corner generally? Is there a programmatic reason why you would put the shelter at the corner and not the retail at the corner to benefit from co-location?
Right. Having operated shelters of this size for 3 decades, one of the concerns and the opportunities that we saw in the rebuild was to basically and conceptually split the shelter into 2 halves. What that does is it increases family traffic through the lobby in the early morning hours when school is beginning and after school hours. And if you have 192 families coming through one entrance area, it gets a little, it's not frantic, but it's a little pressured, and it increases can increase the negativity. We find that much smaller entry environments work better for families and children. They also give our security staff a much better chance to know every one of those people by name. So that's why we have a shelter on the west, a lobby on the west, and a lobby on the east. So from the family's experience, they live in a 94 unit, whatever the math is, shelter, not a 195 unit shelter. We also seek to use the 2 lobbies because they are lit 24/7, and we have security staff for almost that entire period at a desk right on the corner to increase the security, the pedestrian safety, and the lighting on that block. Placing the retail in the center and controlling the lighting there also puts some more light on that street. But the reason we retained those corners were to change the family's experience of entering and exiting a shelter and to make it feel much more at home, smaller scale, less traffic, and more individual attention to the children and the moms.
Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate it. I think inadvertently what you're doing is creating a weaker retail opportunity by putting it mid-block, by reducing the visibility, and your rationale for the 2 entrances absolutely makes sense. I think either the retail should not go there, or if there's a way to get your 2 entrances in some other way so that you can benefit, so the retailer and the business owner. It's a weak little block there.
Yeah.
That's right next to it already, and you're adding to it. So we want to do that in a way that might benefit both.
We may be looking at that also from a more historical perspective. As you may be aware, the East New York Industrial Park is right across the street. So there's nothing at all on that side of the street. And on this side of the street, referring to Sutter Avenue, there's the back end of the current Help One shelter. So there's no traffic. There's absolutely 0 local traffic on that block now.
I mean, yet another reason to think about whether this is the right location for retail. And I have even more concerns about Blake, where we do not have an environment, as I look at the map of many businesses or districts. So again, you're creating an orphaned retail space, and we're struggling right now to fill spaces in many districts.
Your point is well taken. On the other hand, we notice that there's a lot of development going on in this neighborhood, and a lot of that development, the tenants of those units come to and from the Sutter L train station, which is one block below, on that map, below the west shelter lobby. So we anticipate a great increase in pedestrian traffic along that block, but we hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's worth really taking a look at moving that space and co-locating it next to the existing district, which is between Hinsdale and Williams. Thank you.
Commissioner Marin.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that. Good morning, actually, and thank you for the presentation. I think, Dr. Hamline, this question might be for you. As you know, I've been sort of a real critic about the city's policy of housing folks in shelters that do not feel like a home. So, for example, having to traipse through a manufacturing district to a hotel where folks do not have a kitchen to work with. So I would be interested in knowing what was the design criteria that informed how this shelter building would be designed, and could someone talk to the exact layouts of the units, and if there was sort of like an HPD, basic requirement to size those units? I'd be interested in knowing that.
All of the family shelter units have their own sleeping spaces, kitchens, and bathrooms, so that this is not a cafeteria model, nor is it a gang shower model or shared bathroom model. Each family has a door. The door is on a corridor. The door locks. The family comes to the door with a swipe card or whatever. The door opens. They come in. The bathroom is on the right. They go forward. The kitchenette is there. There's a sleeping space to the rear. These are about 400 square feet. 350 to 400 square feet. For larger families, we have the option to utilize a flex function so that you can enter into the common space, but then the rear of the space can open into an adjoining space on either the left or the right to add additional bedroom space to accommodate a larger family. They comply with New York City Building Code, Multiple Dwelling Law, and Housing Maintenance Code. The other thing that we spent a year working with Mark and Curtis and Ginsburg's team, was bringing my shelter operations people together and really putting our heads together on what have we learned from 3 decades of running family shelter. Number one, we've learned that nobody, when they built shelter, put in confidential meeting room space so case managers could meet with families in a dignified, confidential manner and discuss stuff that no one wants to be public. So we have created separate case management areas in the midst of the residential section, and we have in those confidential interviewing rooms, so someone can go in with a family, meet with them, and have that entire thing be confidential. None of the shelters that we work out of or that we built 30 years ago have family intake rooms. What do I mean by that? Families come in typically later in the day, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, they get dropped off. You have a single mom, typically 26 years old, 2 kids, typically under the age of 6. Where are the belongings? Black plastic bags. So we took a lot of time with the design of the lobby to make it welcoming. And as I said, by reducing the size to make it more commodious. And then we designed 2 family intake rooms. Mark, can I have those? They're here, behind the local retail and overlooking the courtyard. So that the idea, and there's no security equipment in those rooms. There's no office equipment. There's refrigerators, there's shelves with toys, et cetera, and windows overlooking the courtyard. The plan here is a kid comes in, they have been struggling throughout the day, they've been on buses, et cetera. They walk in, they walk down the hall, and they go, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, a playground, is that for me?" And the answer is yes, it is, and we'll go there tomorrow morning. So we're looking at things like that. We have put in family service areas throughout the building. I think we have 3 of them. The problem with a lot of shelters is you get volunteer groups. Brooklyn Public Library is an example. They want to do learning to read workshops. But the shelter may not have a space that can be used. I grew up working in medical centers and hospitals where you signed out rooms and volunteers came in and gave groups and education programs, et cetera. So we adopted that model, and we have those scattered throughout the buildings near the case management areas so that we can offer education programs, learning to read programs, Mommy and Me family development workshops. And if you don't build the space in now, you'll never have it. So that's another thing that we did. The daycare opens directly onto the courtyard. So the doors open, the class goes out, the area is segregated from the rest of the courtyard, but they can play outside safely and easily. We also have a computer training room at the bottom, and that room opens both through the shelter and then also on to Snedeker. And we will make that available at no charge to community groups. Let's say they have a disconnected youth program, ages 18 to 24, and they want to increase the computer skills for that group. And they have 15 of them in a working group. We're anticipating having about 25 workstations here in the computer room. All they do is they work out an arrangement with our shelter director, and they have the use for free of that computer room every Tuesday afternoon or whatever it is.
A few more questions. So you talked about the units themselves and the ability for them to flex and morph into larger units. So it is possible then that at some point you'll have less than 192 families if you're using other space.
Correct.
Okay. So and then has this and I'm probably asking the obvious, has this been vetted with DHS?
About 500 times.
Wonderful.
And they're here.
I asked the obvious for a reason, because I think that this is a model that if done properly, can be replicated, because half the psyche of being homeless is where you live and how you treat it. And if, in fact, these units are designed to be family-style units, it also helps with the mentality and the psyche behind living in a shelter and transitioning back to permanent housing. So I really appreciate that. And I would, again, and I know that we're working on this, welcome DHS to come back and give us some presentation about their plans for future shelters, because I really have to applaud you on this. I've been a critic about this, about housing families in shelters without kitchens, traipsing through manufacturing districts, 2 hotels. Although this is not permanent, it certainly feels like a more permanent solution while you transition to something permanent. So I really appreciate what you've done.
Well, thank you. Let me just say that we've worked with DHS on this. We have other proposals that we're working on longer term with them. And I know there are other not-for-profits that are following the same path. The mayor had a Turning the Tide on Homelessness white paper came out about 2 years ago, and we've really looked at that, and Mark has worked with him on an HPD on some of the requirements for the size of the units, et cetera. But I thank you for the compliment.
And I thank you for your work.
Can I just add something, that this has been a rare experience as an architect to have this time to work with a client to rethink how they operate. And we're really excited about the project and working with HELP, and look forward to having it built so that we've created better shelters.
I think that I speak for this body when I say I think we appreciate that, because that's been a concern for a very long time. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Delos.
I appreciate the conversation. One of my questions was going to be, given the number of years of experience that HELP has had, what lessons have you learned that you're applying? And so I think you pretty much answered that question. And I really appreciate overall the thoughtful design of the project. I certainly hear the concerns that Commissioner Ortiz articulated. The questions I have, honestly, are about, given the size of the overall project, besides the relocation of the current families that are in shelter and hopefully their placement, can you talk a little bit about plans for construction phasing of the project? That would be helpful. And then the other question I have is, given all the different components, it'd be helpful to kind of understand what the status of funding or financing is for all the different pieces. It's a pretty big lift. Certainly, HELP has a great reputation, and I'm sure could meet that challenge. But it'd be helpful to hear more about that.
Sure. Again, David Cleghorn. Let me answer the second question first, so I don't forget it. We're intending to utilize 501c3 bonds to finance the majority of the shelter, and that would be backed by the Department of Homeless Service contract with HELP to run the shelter. So that debt service would be paid that way. The 2 buildings that are ELA buildings, so the yellow ones, are going to be a 4% tax-exempt bond transaction, and the supportive housing building will be a 9% supportive housing loan program project. And that, by the way, we've already secured a New York City 1515 commitment on, which carries with it 3 full-time case managers and a full-time nurse to work in the supportive housing building. The second question, or the first question about staging, the plan is to demolish the building all at once.
If you don't mind, I appreciate all the highlights on the financing for the housing pieces. I'm just wondering also about the daycare and the computer lab, if you could highlight that.
The daycare is...
For funding and financing, yeah.
The computer lab, we're going to, that's going to have a nominal cost that we'll utilize agency reserves to fit out because it won't be part of the DHS project. The daycare, I'd ask Tom to answer that. That's a
We have had ACS contracts or Head Start contracts or Early Learn contracts for many, many years. We have them we have 3 of them, 2 in the Bronx, 1 in Brooklyn. We work with DHS and HRA around what are the current eligibility requirements for shelter residents to gain access to the shelter. The shelter we currently have in East New York has 82 slots funded by the City of New York, and we kind of partial those out somewhat equally between shelter residents and also East New York community residents. So it is our plan and what we will do, given the funding that's available in 2 + 3 years, when we get this thing open, to have a daycare program that serves both shelter residents, affordable housing residents from this block, and little kids from the surrounding neighborhood.
Commissioner Burney.
Construction phasing.
I'm sorry.
So in terms of the phasing, our plan is to, once we get through the ULURP process and secure and get our contract, the Department of Homeless Services registered for the new shelter, we'd move forward with demolition of the old shelter. We expect that process to take 5 or 6 months because there has to be a lot. There's to be some subdivision of the lots, and it's complicated, probably a little above my pay grade complicated, but it's a city issue. And then we would close on the financing of the shelter and the 9% supportive building separately, but right around the same time, so that for purposes of construction, that will be one phase, even though it'll have 2 separate financings. And then we're hoping that we will close on the 2 Ella properties in the December 2020 bond round. So at a period of time, all of the project will be under construction at the same time, but they will be finishing at separate times. The shelter and the Ella buildings have 28-month construction schedules, and the supportive building has a 22-month construction schedule. And that's being a little bit cautious, but we found that in other projects in the city, it's better to be cautious than to be aggressive on our timeline.
And now Commissioner Burney.
I just had a couple of quick questions for Mark, actually. So first of all, just to second Commissioner Deleuze's commendation of the design, but could you just put up I think it's the Hinsdale elevation for a second? That's fine. Okay, that's fine. So I'm assuming, since we don't see any window units, that you have a central air system?
We're going to be using VRFs throughout, and then we are also going to have energy recovery ventilators, which will be centralized. So, yes.
So that helps you with the passive house?
It's required for the passive house. Actually, in a year or 2, it will be required for all buildings by the new energy code.
Right.
And yes, the VRFs heat and cool and do not need penetrations.
Yeah, terrific. And the second thing is that the planters that I see on most of these elevations, I'm a bit concerned about who's going to maintain them, because they can very quickly become a blight on the street if they get overgrown and unkept.
And help may want to chime in, but my understanding is they're going to hire a landscaping company with a maintenance contract to maintain them. And that's also true of the front plantings on the maisonette units.
Oh, terrific. Thank you.
Other questions? If I might ask Dr. Hemmeline, if you could come back again. It was mentioned that there will be the separate outdoor area for the shelter. Yep. And I know many of us, and certainly I'm a layperson when it comes to this, but would have thought that encouraging mixing among the residents of the other units as well might have been something to be desired.
Yeah, well, we'll be encouraging mixing through the daycare center, if we have kids programs in the computer training room, other educational programs that will recruit kids from the neighborhood. We also, across the street at Genesis Homes, we run an after-school program, and we run a summer program, and we run a street soccer program. All of those are open to shelter kids and community kids. But that's just the first half of the question. There are two internal courtyards. The family shelter courtyard is 6,600 square feet. The other three buildings have an 18,000 square foot courtyard. So it's basically 3 to 1. They're separated because we, as the shelter operator, are responsible for the safety of all shelter residents, and we're bound by the regulations associated with running shelter. These regulations require that we maintain a record of exactly who is in our facility and who is out in the community. I spoke of the two lobbies. One of the reasons things get congested is because there's sign in and sign out. We're looking to maybe computerize that a little bit better with some swipe cards or something, but it still means that every time people come in or out, we need to know where they are. We need to know where the children are at all time. Are they in the facility? Are they being supervised by, is there an adult also in the facility that is a registered supervisor or caretaker for that child? As I said, we do it by checking people in and out. If we had a shared courtyard, an open courtyard, and kids are out in that courtyard, they can then exit the facility via the other buildings. And that means we don't know where they are. So that's a problem. DHS and OTDA require us to keep those kind of records, and we operate all our shelters. All New York City shelters are operated in that way. We're also required to prevent or to control the access of non-residents into the shelter facility. Very important. Approximately 30% of our family shelter residents identify domestic violence as the proximate reason for homelessness, and many have active orders of protection standing against abusers. We cannot operate safely in a situation where someone can come in via one of the affordable buildings, access the courtyard, come down through the courtyard, enter the shelter through the shelter courtyard, and then go upstairs into the family units and possibly threaten or endanger one of our residents. Those are the two main reasons.
And will the residents of the shelter have access to the 18,000 square foot courtyard if they enter through the other side?
Let's say that they make friends just as where I grew up on the Upper West Side, or I'm sorry, where my kids grew up on the Upper West Side. They make friends with kids down the street. They go over to their apartment. They join. They go out into that courtyard supervised by an adult member of their family. The answer is yes.
But they cannot open to the public, only by the invitation of a resident of the other unit. Okay. Commissioner Marin.
Thank you, Chair, for even bringing that. That was one of the questions that I posed on Monday, so thank you. So toward that end, could you talk about the design of that separating barrier? I don't want to call it a wall, I don't want to call it a fence.
Would you mind if I turn it over to Mark?
Absolutely.
Mark?
I don't have an image here of that specifically, but it is designed to be difficult to get over because we need the security, but it is then going to be planted and landscaped so it doesn't look like, you can sort of see it at the end here. But the concept is that it is a divider, but it is going to be landscaped so it doesn't look like a wall and metal fence. It's going to have plantings along both sides of it. So as you look at it, it just looks like a vertical planting element.
If you could possibly provide a rendering, that would be really very helpful, because my takeaway from this is that we are learning and we will be informing DHS as we continue a colloquy with them regarding shelters. And so this would be very helpful to understand.
We will submit something.
Thank you.
Other questions? Then I'll thank the applicant team. While the actions before the commission are relatively technical and narrow, I think our understanding and appreciation is very much has benefited from your willingness to give us the broader context of the programming for the site. Thank you. Our next speaker will be Bruce Jacobs.
Hello again, Coalition of the Rockaways, supporter of medical and religious freedom, 9/11 first responder, U.S. Navy vet, 30 years transit authority. This sounds good. Every building looks good. This is just a typical shelter with a nonprofit that's making millions of dollars pushing it. This is in every single neighborhood, ruining homeowners, bringing down the values of property. Neighborhoods are not even letting know who's living in these places. He says they're being watched with all kind of groupings. The supportive housing sounds good, but why shelters? Shelters, we don't want shelters. They need supportive houses, real supportive housing. These guys are coming with a beautiful plan. It sounds so great. The shelters that I see, there's nobody watching over them. There's nothing. If you're going to build supportive housing, why can't it all be supportive housing, and why is it shelters? We don't want shelters in different neighborhoods. The Coalition of Rockaway stands with every single neighborhood. We don't want shelters. These people need help. I have friends at the Veterans Administration who they give them an apartment and they end up homeless because they don't have programs. He says there's programs, then why is there a shelter building? Shelters all over in every single neighborhood. There are people that live there. The Nehemiah houses even, they bought these houses to hopefully for a future. Now their Nehemiah house ain't worth nothing. You have to keep into consideration the neighborhood. I know a fancy with a big fancy staff comes in front of you and says, hey, we're going to put shelters. He's talking about other shelters besides this shelter. That's not right. That people put investments into neighborhoods and they're stuck with a shelter standing there. If he was talking supportive housing, I'm totally for it, but he's talking shelter. The name shelter, I don't care how beautiful the building looks, it's still a shelter. Most real homeless in the street would rather go to prison or stay on a train than go to a shelter. So the idea that he says, oh, we're helping out people, but we're opening shelters all over New York, that is not an understanding moment. And Blake Avenue, like the Nehemiah houses, people put investments into that. That they that's not everybody is totally like homeless and doesn't have work and they want to live a good life and they want their kids to go to a corner. Until they get rid of this name shelter, this plan should be watched over very close. Because he says 30 years, I wonder how the neighborhood really feels about a shelter on the corner. And then every single neighborhood, Glendale, Upper East Side, all over Manhattan, shelters, supportive housing, fine.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Our next speaker will be Gina Park, who will be followed by Nancy Nunziata.
Hi, good morning. My name is Gina Park. I'm a social worker and the executive director of Help One Homeless Family Shelter located at 515 Blake Avenue in Brooklyn. As you are all aware, family homelessness is a big problem in our city. In fact, 38,000 of the almost 60,000 people living in shelters in New York City are living there as a family unit, and over 21,000 are children. In New York City, family shelter is our society's answer to a problem which on its face is simple. Many families can't afford the rent. Each family's homelessness, however, is a multifaceted problem marked by current challenges and past traumas. There are hurdles stopping families from achieving their potential in employment, in savings, and in raising their children. At Help USA, we talk about these challenges, get our clients to recognize their strengths, and help them make decisions that will facilitate their return to permanent housing and their ability to go on with their lives. We can't change the housing market or the employment market for our families, but we can reshape the way that our clients interact with those systems. Help USA provides family shelters where this work can happen. At 515 Blake Avenue in East New York, we have been providing this kind of service for over 30 years in a building that was built to last for 15 years. When Help One opened in the late 1980s, the prevailing view was that family homelessness was a passing phenomenon. This, of course, has proved untrue. The scourge of family homelessness has persisted, and the families that we serve have become even more vulnerable in the face of increasingly tighter housing markets. One of the major problems I struggle with as the executive director of Help One is that my building is no longer up to the task of providing the services that our families need at the level of dignity and respect that they require. To put it simply, the building has outlived its usefulness. A list of top-line items that are in need of capital repairs includes the following. Boilers are in need of replacement. The entire roofing system must be replaced. The heating elements in the residential units need to be replaced, and windows throughout the building must be upgraded to reduce cold air infiltration in the winter. Even more critically, the site does not have the spaces that are needed to serve clients in the manner that they require. There is almost no space for confidential meetings between families and staff. Social workers posted to our site by the current administration do not have appropriate offices. We don't have a dedicated family intake room where we can meet with the new families who have just arrived at our site, nor do we have group rooms where staff and volunteers can work with our residents. The parents that we serve at Help One deserve an environment that will facilitate their flourishing as parents. They need a space where their children can run and play safely. They need an environment where they can get the support and assistance they need to ensure that their children's developmental needs are being met. Their children need space to do their homework, increase their computer skills, and meet up with their friends. A purpose-built, trauma-informed, and fully thought.
I'm afraid, Ms. Park, if you could submit your testimony.
Absolutely.
We would welcome that. And questions for Ms. Park. Thank you. Oh, Commissioner Marin.
Ms. Park, I think you're the appropriate person to ask, because I hear mommy and me. So what is the population? What do you see as your population in your building? Is it mostly single mothers, or is it families? Is it gentlemen, men with children?
We have very few men head of household and their children, but we do have a few. Most of our families are single mother head of household with about 2 or more children.
Thank you.
No problem.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Park.
Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Nancy Nunziata, to be followed by Sherilyn McMillan.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Nancy Nunziata, and I'm a Senior Vice President at Help USA. I've been working at Help for 28 years. The majority of my time, interestingly enough, has been in the East Brooklyn section. Actually, that's where my office is currently. And what I wanted to talk to you about today is the supportive housing program and the services that we provide, which is going to be a large part of our new redevelopment of 515 Blake Avenue. Currently, we have 3 supportive housing programs right there, right across the street and around the corner from the 515 Blake Avenue project. One of them is called our Genesis Home Supportive Housing Program, which is a HUD-funded program where we are working with, at Genesis Homes, we have 150 units. And what we did, let's see, it's going to be 5 years now. What we did 5 years ago is we took 25 of those units and we got funded through HUD to take in chronically homeless families, folks that had physical disabilities, mental health disabilities, substance abuse issues, et cetera. And we built a program where we had clinical staff, case management staff, education and employment staff who work with those families in an intensive case management model, with the goal being to sustain them in housing, because these folks have been going through the system for many years. Proud to say that we opened that program December 31st of 2014, and as of today, 24 of those 25 families are successfully living and remaining with us. We lost one family because there was a death. But everybody else has stayed with us and is doing very well. The adults are flourishing, and so are the children, and they've become part of the East New York community. So that's one program. The other program that we've had, which has been in existence a little bit longer, is a state-funded program. It's called the New York State Supportive Housing Program. And we're working with the families in our 3 permanent housing buildings in East New York: Genesis Homes, Genesis Neighborhood Plaza 1, and Genesis Neighborhood Plaza 2. And again, there we have case management staff and employment staff who are working with families when, especially if they're running into trouble, they're behind in the rent or something's going on with their kids, someone's having difficulty in school, and then our folks come in and, again, try to support those families. And on average, the families that we're working with in our New York State's Board of Housing program, they've remained with us for well over 10 years. And then finally, we have a VASH program in our Genesis Neighborhood Plaza 2 that works with veterans specifically.
Thank you, Ms. Nunziata, for this education on the services that are provided. Questions? Commissioner Deleuze.
Thanks for coming and thanks for sharing more about your services. I'm just, the first program that you highlighted that for the 25 families, we're 24 nearly 5 years later. What, given their chronic homelessness, what normally would have been, without this intervention, what would have perhaps been the outcome for those families?
Well, they probably would still be circling the homeless system.
I guess what percentage normally would be back into the homeless system had this intervention not been?
Out of the 25, I would venture at least 50%, maybe more, and that's part of the issue. Yeah. So, the housing is an important piece. We have to get people housed. But a lot of folks, once they go into housing, their job doesn't end there. It really then is building a support system around that family so that you can help sustain them in housing. By the way, I didn't say, but I do have a letter from one of our clients. Can I
If you could introduce it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Great.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Nunziata.
Thanks very much.
Our next speaker is Sherilyn McMillan.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, my name is Charlotte McMillan. I'm the Director of Family, Youth, and Educational Services. We're located in Genesis Homes at 330 Hinsdale, right across from 515 Blake Avenue. We offer an after-school program that serves children between the age of 15 and 13, living in Help 1, Genesis Homes, GMP 1, and GMP 2, and the surrounding community. We serve 60 to 80 children daily throughout the school year. The program operates Monday through Friday, 3 to 7 p.m. The after-school program offers homework help, recreational activities such as soccer, arts and craft, board games, etc. And most recently, we partnered with the Salvadori Foundation to bring in a STEM-based program. We also operate holiday camp. That is out of school time when children are out of school, so we operate between the hours of 8 and 5 p.m. We offer a summer camp program that's 6 weeks between July and August. We serve between 80 to 85 children within the same age group of 5 to 13. We have a scholarship program that's funded by Help USA Board of Directors, and that is where we give families the opportunity to get a private school education. So currently we partner with Bishop Lachlan Memorial. We have successfully graduated 4 individuals. We currently have 3 who are enrolled. We partner with Trewhitt Field Elementary, which is based in the community. We have successfully graduated 3, and we have 1 student who will be graduating in 2020 school year. We have a College Bronx program where we assist and help families with navigating the college process and the financial aid process. We have students who are based in Buffalo State, Alfred State, SUNY Plattsburgh, SUNY Morrisville. And one of our most success story is our first gentleman. He just graduated in the past graduating school year, and he was hired by Geico. So he was the first one that went through our program. This year, we have helped 8 students to move forward into college living in our residence. We have a mentoring program that operates between October and June, and that's basically what the parents have identified to us. We have identified children needing extra support help out of schools, and we meet with them every other Saturday for 2 hours. And we have success stories where we have children who came in who felt they didn't have a voice, and because of working with adults within our community and the surrounding boroughs, they now are speaking up for themselves, or if they were having an issue in school. And note, I was raised in East New York. So, thank you.
Combining the professional and personal questions. Thank you, Ms. McMillan. I note that we also have available for questions Lisa Lau from AKRF. Okay, those are the folks who have, oh, yes, of course.
As of yet, we haven't received the Borough President's recommendation. So when we do, I was hoping that the applicant would be able to respond to it, so it'll be in front of us for our review session.
Great, good point, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the folks who have signed up to speak. If anyone else is interested, please come forward. The public hearing is closed.
Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 31, CD 12, C190305, ZMK, a public hearing in the matter of an application for a zoning map amendment concerning 6003 8th Avenue rezoning.
Our first speaker will be Richard Lobel.
Good morning, Richard Lobel of Sheldon Lobel PC. And we're here today to discuss the 6003 8th Avenue rezoning. So this is a rezoning of a property located within the circled area on the map, which is currently in an R6 C13 district. Several things to note about the property. The first is that if you take a look at the block is bisected by a district boundary. So to the south of this block frontage along 8th Avenue is an M11. This M11 continues for several blocks and results in some very robust commercial uses, including a relatively large supermarket on the subject block. Additionally, you could note that the C42 district already exists in the area to the southwest of this block. You see C42, which was so rezoned in 2007. This was in contemplation of a large mixed-use development along the transit line. So looking at the particulars of the rezoning, you see that along 8th Avenue, the proposed rezoning would include a C42 overlay, C42 district, which would correspond with the current C13 overlay. The residential and other uses along the block would be untouched, but the C42 would essentially allow for commercial development, which is more in line with current uses along 8th Avenue in this area. And you can see that here, you take a look at 8th Avenue as you go north. The R6 C13 district actually already exists currently for at least 15 blocks going north on 8th Avenue. However, many of the uses along this block actually have commercial uses on the upper stories, which are contrary to the R6 C13. So the R6 C13 in a mixed-use building would only allow commercial uses on the ground floor. In a fully commercial building, would allow for an FAR of 2, but many of these buildings, these existing buildings, are contrary to that zoning. Particularly on this block and on this site, the application here would allow the applicant to legalize the current condition. There is commercial use on all 3 stories of the building, which would not be permitted under the existing R6 C13, but would be allowed under the proposed C42. And so here you can see what the proposed zoning district boundary would be this 150-foot deep commercial district along 8th Avenue. Just going briefly to the zoning comparison table, you can see that the changes with regards to the 2 districts are relatively minimal. Indeed, there's only one stated change here, which is to result in a maximum commercial FAR of 3.4. The maximum FAR for the building community facility at 4.8 would remain. We did have a unanimous vote of the Community Board 12, as well as the Brooklyn Borough President's vote in favor, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about the application.
Thank you, Mr. Lobel. Questions? Commissioner De La Hoz.
Hi, Richard. Thanks for being here. I appreciate that that the application is consistent with a number of the uses that exist along this corridor, and that it's really about kind of keeping up with some of the demand for upper floor commercial space in that particular area. I'm a bit concerned, though, honestly, about the fact that we're taking residential, it's incentivizing taking off residential uses in an area where there's also significant demand for apartments. And so can you talk a little, perhaps the last time that the upper floors were used for residential uses in this case? And Yeah, I'll keep it for that.
Sure. So prior to the time of the applicant's purchase, the building was vacant. So I know at a minimum it has been vacant, and there haven't been residential uses there for at least 5 years. I'd say with particularity, this issue was discussed at the community board. So essentially this, essential trade-off between potential residential uses on the upper stories versus commercial. I think what was expressed at the community board, and I think one of the reasons that they were so strongly in favor, was that they felt that, as did the borough president, that 8th Avenue is a extremely well-traveled commercial thoroughfare. It's adjacent to the N line is a block to the southwest, the subway line with bus lines running north and south along 8th Avenue. So in the trade-off, and most of the time I do come here, it's usually the trade-offs on the other end. But in this respect, particularly in this area, they really felt that commercial use here was robust, and that that this was in the balance. This is something they wanted to see. I was off the record approached by several members of the community board who actually expressed to me their displeasure that the rezoning was limited to this block. They had properties along 8th Avenue, and they said, why isn't this continuing, blocks and blocks above the, above this block? And, we talked about the fact that this was the limitation of this rezoning. But it's again, in the balance. One of the things that was the community board looked at was, should an owner desire residential use? This, of course, would not preclude them from that. The C42 equivalent is the same, and the R6 equivalent exists for the C42 zoning. But to the extent that nobody wanted to see vacant buildings, that they would be able to populate it with office use.
Vice Chair Nichols.
I believe the record was that the owner, your client, acquired this property in 2016?
2015.
2015.
Correct.
So I think the concern is, at least on my part, is that commercial character notwithstanding, the owner seemingly disregarded the, what I assume is a clearly stated zoning classification, and went directly to commercial and seemed to, and seemingly disregard of the zoning. So, we're now asked to bail him out,
right?
So to speak.
And I understand from the commission's prior votes on similar applications that oftentimes we have particularly smaller applicants who come in and avail themselves of the rezoning process in an effort to legalize without looking to the intent of that owner. What I'd say here is that they actually did not do any work that was contrary to Department of Buildings regulations. The upper stories maintain their residential fixtures and were able to be used for residential. Here, what happened was that there were solo practitioners, small offices, which came in, and in an effort to basically populate the space, the owner, did allow those commercial uses at the site. This is, clearly a legalization, and while it's not our favorite application, the truth is that I think there's a couple of things that prevail. One is that, as was noted at the community board, the land use rationale here makes a lot of sense, which is that you're adjacent to an M11 site, and on these buildings in particular, to the extent that you can have rather noxious uses to the south of the property, they felt that in this block it was particularly appropriate for a C42. And in addition to that, for better or for worse, this condition is prevalent along 8th Avenue, and I think they felt that there happened to be a lot of these illegal conditions which exist, and so they felt that they could go along with that and attempt to legalize it. But we do recognize that it's not a great situation, but it does allow for productive use of the building.
And again, did the owner ever seek to rent the upstairs portion as residential?
The owner, so the way that the applications were phased were the property was purchased in 2015. In 2016, they sought to expand the ground floor commercial use in an effort to, as an as-of-right application. They maintain the residential fixtures and the ability to rent the upper stories for residential, but never found any residential tenants for that space. And so that's when it was populated with commercial. So again, I can't make excuses to the fact that this is a legalization. It's in the application. I would just note that, the commission often sees legalizations and there's choices to be made, and we are hopeful that we can legalize this condition.
Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, Richard, thank you for that. Well, the several points you've been making here. I mean, it is very, it's a compelling argument that the condition that exists here exists along, you said maybe 15 blocks. It does raise the question in my own mind about whether we really should be looking at a wider rezoning, understand the practicalities that prevent that, but that's really what's, that's the correct way to approach this. But as returning to the actions that your client has taken to tenant the upper floors with commercial use, did that require any reconfiguration of those spaces? Was there work done that required DOB permits?
No, the work that was done, so there was facade work that was done, and then there was work done to the commercial ground floor that required DOB permits. The residential fixtures and such were maintained, so there was no work that was required on the upper stories. The occupation of those and those are occupied by primarily by solo practitioners. So there's a law office on the second and the third floor, and so they basically took the space as it existed.
Okay, so there wasn't any physical work done to accommodate those new tenants that just moved into what had been apartments.
Correct.
Okay.
And just as an aside, as a fully commercial building, the FAR on the site, it's not that you can't even have a fully commercial building, it's that it would be at an FAR of 2. This building actually is fully commercial and is at an FAR of 2.2. So the legalization which we're looking at here, it's not used contrary to zoning per se. It's the fact that it's basically there's a 690-foot portion of the building that is over the 2 FAR. So I think that was something that was also kind of mitigated in favor of the application of the community board. While we know and have seen applications where there is a fully commercial use that goes into a residential area and padlocking occurs and it was a direct violation, this really is not that. This basically is an attempt to legalize what amounts to about 690 square feet.
Commissioner Edie.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. You'd mentioned the facade work. Was the facade, did that get DOB approval?
It did.
And is that facade suitable for residential use as well? Are those operable windows?
It's a fully glass facade. I can submit supplementally to the commission because the C of O, which was issued after the work, I think it's after the work, probably around 2016 to 17, was, allows for residential use in the upper stories. I don't know about the operability of the windows as well as whether or not the bedrooms are facing the rear of the building, but I'm happy to provide that supplementally to the
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Commissioner De La Luz.
I just want to pick up on Commissioner Levin's point about, and I think yours as well, that several property owners to the north approached you about wanting to do this, extend this. I mean, one thing is, 8th Avenue is the dividing line between Community Board 7 and Community Board 12. And I venture to say that Community Board 7 may have a different perspective on this very same question than Community Board 12. So I think that might be one of the reasons why it hasn't been talked about, because there's not agreement.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's just, from a land use perspective, for me, it's interesting to walk along the avenue and just take a look up and see all these, this condition. Yeah.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Lobel.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioners.
Our next speaker will be Bruce Jacobs.
Bruce Jacobs, Coalition of Rockaway, supporter of medical and religious freedom, first responder, U.S. Navy vet, 30 years transit. I can't see how you're going to legalize this. This guy did things against the zoning law. He was supposed to rent upstairs residential. He made it into a commercial without permission. You're going to go here and give him a variance after he disregarded the other variance and he bought it in 2015 and did all these violations. He says that he has from the building department, that the facade work, where is it? I like to see it. He says people in the neighborhood came over to him and said, oh, why can't you expand this? Now, you could say that with anything. I could do that, anything illegal. It's still breaking the law. The building was put into a special zoning district, and now you're going to come here and rectify it? To me, there's more involved. And like the lady said over there, the commissioner, maybe this number 7, Community Board 7, has a different opinion on this. And he's telling you that where these people came to him. To me, anytime you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law. If you're going to give variances and they're set up with a certain variance, and then they totally disregarded it, what makes you think that he's not going to disregard this? To me, I don't care how nice it is for the neighborhood. He didn't do it legally. I could change my home into a medical center, make $1 million, and say, hey, and do it illegally. By giving him a variance, you're giving him permission for breaking the law, and he totally broke it. And I don't care what it's doing for the neighborhood. There were supposed to be people living up there, and he says that, because it was used across the street. I don't care about across the street, because across the street might have came here and did it legally. If they have a legal thing, it's legal. But he opened it up after a zoning issue was already put in. So how's he going to follow, after you give him the variance, how's he going to follow those instructions? He could change it and do the same thing that he did with the first one. To me, you got to watch that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If there are any other speakers who'd like to be heard on this matter, please come forward. The public hearing is closed. And Madam Secretary, any other business before the commission?
Madam Chair.
Okay, then we will segue to a special review session.
Good afternoon. This is the special review session for Wednesday, September 11th, 2019. The time is 12:06 p.m. and a quorum is present. The first item on our agenda is a post-hearing follow-up in Brooklyn for 101 Fleet Place rezoning. Anthony Grande is here.
Good morning or good afternoon, commissioners. We're here to discuss the 101 Fleet Place application. So as you'll recall, this was an application for rezoning to AC64 district and extending the special downtown Brooklyn district to cover the site. The site is just on the edge of the downtown Brooklyn area, and it would facilitate the development of a 14-story, about 200,000 square foot commercial building. As we've discussed, as has been discussed previously, the site is on the mid-block of a narrow street, and it does border the commercial districts to the west and the more sort of medium density residential areas to the east. During ULURP, the community board voted to approve the project with no conditions on June 24th. And the borough president recommended to modify the zoning district to a C61 district, or alternatively finding a way to limit alternative residential scenarios through side agreements and among other recommendations. At the CPC public hearing, there was significant discussion amongst the commission regarding the district's heights, densities, and also the potential for allowing the residential alternative, which would be allowed in the proposed zoning. So in response, the applicant did submit a letter on August 29th, which you should have received, confirming their commitment to develop a purely non-residential building and referring to their existing portfolio as evidence of their intentions. So based on this discussion during certification and at the public hearing and in response to the borough president's recommendation, the department did an analysis of the C61 zoning to take a look at what that would do in the site, and I'll just run through a few massing diagrams on the slide. So as discussed, the applicant is proposing the C64 district and extending the special downtown Brooklyn district and the 400-foot height limit across the site. So this would result in a 14-story, 200,000 square foot commercial building, which would rise to 196 feet. So what you see here is essentially matching what the applicants are proposing. And then we also have a mixed-use residential alternative, which could be either residential building or mixed use with commercial on the ground floor. So in this scenario, the building could rise to 34 stories, about 380 feet. Again, the height is actually would be capped at 400 feet through the special district. And this building could rise to, or could amount to, a total of 12 FAR, taking advantage of MIH and the FAR allowed in the MIH allowance. So taking a look at the C61 district that was recommended, when mapped in the special downtown Brooklyn district, this would have a commercial FAR of 6.0 and a community facility FAR of 6.5. And the residential FAR would be 4.6, equivalent with an R7. So if the proposal were modified to the C61, the site could be developed as a commercial development similar to what the applicants have been describing, just with a lower density at 6 FAR, which would amount to 130,000 square feet, and would rise to 9 stories, about 126 feet. So this would include 10,000 square feet, which would be allowed as additional FAR for providing community facility space as well, because the FAR for community facility space is 6.5 versus 6 for commercial. And then taking a look at the residential alternative, so under the C61 district, the site would also have a residential alternative. This is equivalent to an R72, which is the same district, very similar to the R71 that's mapped just to the north, the buildings adjacent on the block. So this could be developed with a 13-story, 135-foot residential mixed-use building, assuming two ground floors of commercial space and then residential above. So modifying the proposal from C64 to C61, this would result in a reduction of the commercial proposal from a 200,000 square foot building to approximately 130,000 square feet with commercial and community facility. So, looking in the zoning, there really are no off-the-shelf zoning districts which would sort of be in between these two densities with the 6 FAR versus the 10 in the proposal. And then, further, this district is unique in that it has a high preference for commercial and community facility uses over residential, in fact. So therefore, the department would advise modifying the zoning district to C61.
And I'll note that this should come as no surprise. In working with the applicant before certification, the department had made clear throughout that we thought the C64 was too dense and something that was picked up on by a conclusion that the borough president independently came to. And so I'd welcome any discussion about the proposed modification. Commissioner De La Hoz.
I wasn't here for the hearing, but I know the site well, and I think that the modification is appropriate.
Other comments? Yes, Commissioner Dweck.
It's definitely appropriate, but it is unfortunate we don't have somewhere in between in the text.
You're channeling the views of the department that we wish there had been an in between 126 feet and 380 feet. And again, it is in downtown Brooklyn, an area that we think can take density. We certainly like the fact that the proposal was for 100% commercial by an owner that has a track record of it. But looking at this particular site with Fleet Place being a narrow street, we came to the conclusion that having it be slightly less dense was better than having it be too dense, and that's why we agreed with the borough president on the C61. Commissioner Burney.
And does the owner agree with this? They'll go ahead even though it's a reduced?
It'll be the owner's choice. The owner decided to pursue certification at C64, knowing that the department was not supportive of it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Anthony.
Thanks.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is a post-hearing follow-up for zoning map and zoning text amendments and special permits, La Hermosa. I do want to note that the end date for the CPC review clock is October 15th, so we do have time to consider this and have a special meeting on the October 15th. So that gives us some more time to consider that. I'll let Annie talk about the latest from the applicant.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So just to expand upon what Ryan just said about the date when we realize we can bring this to a vote on the 15th, I'm here today to answer any questions, but I also want to clarify that we'll be coming back on the 23rd, that review session, to have a more robust discussion. So in response to the concerns raised at this past Monday's review session and also at the previous public hearing, the applicant is taking a serious look at their massing of the building and is in the process of modifying their proposal. In fact, as a testament to that, just since Monday, they've already provided a preliminary proposal that looks at shifting bulk to the south across the La Hermosa Church building proper. But now that we know that we have one more cycle, we are going to work, the DCP staff is going to work directly with the applicant over the next 2 weeks to refine that proposal to better respond to this commission's concerns. So we'll be exploring options that involve modifications that continue to use the special permit within the scope of the waivers that they were previously seeking, but also comparing that to modified bulk that would be possible under the outcome of C19 without the special permit. I'm happy to answer any questions today, but I will be back on the 23rd with a more robust discussion.
I want to note that while we're pleased that the applicant heard the concerns of the commission about having such a dense footprint on the building portion of the site because of keeping the church without any building above it, I'm concerned. This is something that the department had raised right from the beginning, and it would have been far preferable for the new proposal to have been the one considered by the community during the public review process. The proposal that has, or the modifications that have been shared with us are a good first step, but I've certainly charged the department with making sure that when they come back, we will have a view as to whether the required or the requested waivers, the modified waivers under the special permit, are preferable to a C19, what that alone without a special permit would require. Looking at what has been provided to date, there's more work to do, which is why we thought not to use the commission's time on a proposal that we think still requires significant additional work. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, a post-hearing follow-up on the Bronx Special District text update. Carol Samuels here to discuss.
Hi, good morning, or afternoon, good morning. Yeah, I'd like to follow up on 2 items. We had a pretty robust discussion on Monday, I think, about some of the text changes. Today, I wanted to address our work with the Department of Buildings, which was a key concern raised during the public hearing process, but also then revisit the community board notice. And I'll first talk about the Department of Buildings and all that we're doing there, and then go to the community board notice. So for the Department of Buildings, you know, they were a partner as we created this text, and you received correspondence from the commissioner herself. You know, they're fully prepared to take on the new regulations. But we fully believe that we've created a clear, enforceable regulations that reflect updated science and will have better environmental outcomes that will be enforceable. That said, we also recognize that there's a very important transition period that is necessary. I think DOB recognizes that, city planning recognizes that. So we're in the process now of creating kind of letters of commitment between the agencies to kind of spell out what that might look like, that transition period. We're looking at 1 year, which we think will be adequate time to provide, to meet our commitments in areas like training of the plan examiners and the inspectors, having actual materials that we would create similar to the guide, the homeowner's guide. Further guides, having a technical guide in addition to the homeowner's guide with a lot more detail. We think that'll be a really important document to make the text just that much more accessible for practitioners as well as the community. We're committed to dedicating staff time to doing joint plan review for this year. We'll sit down with plan examiners and we'll bring our own expertise to the table, look at what's submitted, and we're focused on. There was a lot of focus in the testimony about sites 10,000 to an acre, and we think that's where we would focus our efforts. In this site plan review, but also creating forms and templates that will help make sure that the special district rules are given proper review into the future, and being available to assist with inspections, going to the site with inspectors and sharing what we see. We think that will be a really important offer. That, of course, we're always the partners. They're our sister agency. We consult with them today. They consult with us, and that will continue into the future regardless. And I would also say, we're also fully available to the public. We're very proud to be a very accessible agency. People come in, they want to understand the text, they want to understand what they can do on their property. We have the zoning help desk. We have lots of ways that people can access us. But we're committed to providing this level of assistance to make sure that there's a good transition to the Department of Buildings, to recognize that they're taking on an independent review of something that they don't independently review today, just like we would with any zoning text, but with a little more attention to detail here. We're also working with the Department of Parks and Recreation, their forestry, horticulture, and natural resources. They are the writers of the book about invasive species. In fact, the text refers practitioners and applicants to that text. And we think they'll continuing to play a role and supportive role for the Department of Buildings, especially in identifying plant species, tree species, that sort of thing, and of course invasive species. So, before you vote, we'll have draft letters there or completed letters for you to understand. But that's what we'll cover. I don't know if there's any questions about that right now.
If I would just amplify, we're so focused on working with DOB on getting the templates correct, because unlike now where every approval is different, it's a matter of case-by-case negotiation, they are going to become bog standard, except for the ones that come before us, the larger ones, which we think will lead to ease of application, which DOB always values. We're willing to do double duty, basically to tag team for a year to work hand in glove, because we do have expertise internally, and we heard from the communities that they valued our expertise. So we sort of pushed the limits of it. A year is a long time to be doing double work, but we thought it worthwhile, again, because we heard from the community. The third is Commissioner Ramprashad, who has such expertise in filings with the Buildings Department, has some ideas about ways that DOB systems could be automatically call up in the way an e-designation is call up that there is an SNRD requirement. And so, Jutan and Carol, if you could reach out, I think that would be invaluable as we're crafting the forms. Questions? Commissioner Marin.
Carol, thank you for that. And I really appreciate the fact that the department is willing to assist the Department of Buildings with understanding this new text and how it applies and things like that. Because I got to tell you, I left the public hearing and I remained concerned with Commissioner Defoe's response when I asked the question about enforcement, and his response was, I'm not here to take a look at what the Department of City Planning is putting in or changing text, other than we'll give them a fine when this happens. And then that leads back to Commissioner Levin and her response today and her vote of no, because we're correcting something that was done incorrectly that the Buildings Department should have picked up on. So I'm really, really happy to hear that the Department of City Planning is willing to help them out, because, again, I just was not assured from that public hearing that the Department of Buildings was willing to do anything. I think a memorandum between the two departments is critical and will help solidify that understanding between the two departments. So thank you for that. And I also want to appreciate, I appreciate the fact that you handed out that that guide. That's very helpful.
Yes.
And I think will help to assure that what we're putting in place will be, in fact, be followed and understandable. Again, all of us remain concerned about the 10,000 to 1 acre. So I know that we're still, proposing changes, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I mean, I'll just say also, I'll also have to always remind myself, we wrote rules that are very much more measurable and clearer, have clear limits that we didn't have before. And I have full faith that with our training and our assistance, we can do that. And I look forward to the other insights about the Department of Buildings processes. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Commissioner De La Hoz.
I'll pile on the congratulations or the positive feedback on the handbook. I think that's really, really helpful. And I'm just wondering, to the extent, is any consideration for perhaps doing some kind of training for professionals who most often are dealing with these kinds of situations? I think that could really be a benefit as well, in tandem with the kind of support and training that's going on for DOB.
Absolutely.
I do think that the technical guide, which we have not yet produced, is going to be probably the single most useful item for that cadre of people, but it's a great idea for us to do outreach sessions to them. Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, these all sound like positive developments, so look forward to seeing the letters of commitment, but that does sound like the way to go here. Have you given any thought to ongoing monitoring by this DCP of applications into the future after the transition period? Does DCP have any ability to monitor applications that are being made to DOB, or should it be a situation where DCP staff receives, not necessarily do anything about it, but receives copies of whatever gets submitted to DOB? If we're only talking about 7 applications a year,
Actually, if I could take that one on, we are not an enforcement agency, and I would be concerned about that. As we were looking at what changes made sense for the Bronx, it is always with an eye towards the fact that we also are re-engaging on Staten Island, where the numbers are not insignificant, 7, and where the amount of planner time that is spent on these smaller applications, I think as a management issue, takes away from other work that could be being done there. That's not the situation in the Bronx office. But that said, I do think we care about the SNRD. It is a creature of our zoning. And I think the notion of, after the first year, having check-ins with DOB, what are they seeing? What are we hearing? I think that could be incredibly useful.
Yes. And also, we're always partners with, we have regular check-ins with the Department of Buildings, discuss issues as they arise. And I would say, we've always really stepped back to wanting to keep our roles as our roles should be. But then this brings me to the second point that I wanted to raise, which was the community board referral, because I feel like there's a public moment there too that would help towards I think the issue that you're concerned about. We recommend, we heard a lot about, wanting to keep the community board, or at least allowing a public forum for potential discussion of the natural resource district applications. Today, they go through this public review process. It could take, 13 months for them to go through this process with the community board, with the agency. So we're also very committed to also keeping a simpler process. So our recommendation is to add to the Department of Buildings filing requirements that they've given the Natural Resource District application materials to the Community Board 30 days in advance. We believe that that would allow for the opportunity for public discussion if the Community Board so chooses. This is a notice requirement. This is not a hearing requirement, a recommendation requirement, anything like that. I want to be very clear about that. But we also know that the Department of Buildings filing process takes time for plumbing and electrical and all of those things, and that conversation can continue. Both of these processes are public. The Community Board, the filings at the Department of Buildings. We think this will go a long way towards keeping an opportunity for public notice and a public forum. For more intense, we mentioned this on Monday, and I'll just reiterate, for more intense projects like enlargements and new buildings, there is a continued challenge period of Department of Buildings rulings, 45-day period for those. Built within the review period at the Department of Buildings, and that will remain, and that can be another moment where public review and comment can be delivered. And this gets also to, there's also the technology, the use of technology that the Department of Buildings is ever increasing all the time. Having the Building on My Block information portal, so everyone would be aware of when things are filed, how they change, how they're moving through the process. Having homeowners' nights in the boroughs for the Department of Buildings so they can take in information and share information. We could join the Department of Buildings for some of those evenings when they're in the Natural Resource District. So I feel like there are a lot of other ways that the community can stay abreast and stay involved and stay aware. And we think that's an appropriate amendment.
And the one thing that I'll note, just elaborating on what Carol said, is that there had been some discussion of filing an application with the Department of Buildings and it being issued the next day. That's not the reality. And so we think that providing the notice 30 days before the application can even be filed at buildings will, in reality, lead to a multi-month process even before an appeals period. Questions? Commissioner Levin.
Not a question, but just a comment. It seems to be a good balance between all the different concerns we've heard in the public discussion leading up to this. And, there are a whole bunch of other kinds of applications that happen in the city that have this kind of a notice requirement. An inclusionary housing application. You got to send a copy to the community board. I've been trying to think of other ones, but this is not, this is quite common and shouldn't be taken as anything unusual. And most of the time, folks won't surface any issues. But I think given the sensitivities about these changes, it's entirely appropriate to do it that way.
Other comments? Okay, thank you, Carol.
Thank you all.
And I believe that wraps things up.
Yes, this concludes the special review session for Wednesday, September 11th, 2019. The time is 12:32 p.m.
Oh, this is